The sound of cleats digging into the dirt echoed across the high school football field. Sweat poured down Jordan Carter's face as he sprinted down the sideline, his powerful legs pumping with precision and speed. Each step seemed to propel him farther and faster than the last. The afternoon sun bore down on the team, but Jordan didn't care. He thrived in the heat, in the pressure. This was where he came alive on the field, with a football in his hands. The coach's whistle shrieked, cutting through the air. Jordan slowed to a jog, his chest heaving as he made his way back to the huddle. His teammates slapped him on the back, nodding in respect. Jordan had been the standout player since his freshman year, and now, as a senior, he was one of the top high school athletes in the state. But no matter how much effort he put in, no matter how much better he was than the other players, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being held back. He glanced toward the sideline where Coach Davis stood, arms crossed, a clipboard in one hand and his face set in that familiar scowl. The older man was always watching, but never in the way that made Jordan feel valued. It was a look of scrutiny, not admiration. The coach's eyes narrowed as Jordan jogged back to his position, not a single word of encouragement coming from his lips. It had been like this for as long as Jordan could remember. Coach Davis, a fixture in the school's football program for over 2 decades, had always seemed to hold Jordan to a different standard. Even as Jordan excelled, breaking records and earning scholarships, Davis rarely praised him in the same way he did for players like Brett Howard, a tall, blonde quarterback with half the talent and twice the opportunity. As the team gathered for the next play, Jordan couldn't help but feel that familiar sense of frustration bubbling up inside him. It wasn't just that he was better than Brett, it was that everyone knew it. But still, every game, Brett got more time on the field, more opportunities to shine. It was as if Coach Davis had made up his mind about who his stars were, and Jordan wasn't one of them, despite everything he'd proven. The team broke the huddle and lined up again for another drill. Jordan crouched low, ready to explode forward. Across from him, Brett took his position, eyes locked ahead with a forced intensity that Jordan knew was just for show. The ball snapped, and Jordan flew into motion, cutting sharply across the field and leaping to snag the ball out of midair. He landed on his feet, spinning around to avoid a defender, then sprinted downfield. The defenders gave chase, but they couldn't catch him. With a final burst of speed, Jordan crossed into the end zone, the ball tucked securely under his arm. He slowed to a jog, breathing hard but steady, as his teammates cheered. "Nice run, Carter," one of his teammates yelled. "Man, you're unstoppable." Jordan smiled, feeling the rush of adrenaline and the satisfaction of proving himself yet again. But when he glanced over at Coach Davis, there was nothing. No smile, no nod of approval. The coach didn't even bother to acknowledge the play. Instead, Davis barked out orders for the next drill, his attention shifting immediately to Brett. "Howard, you're up. Let's see some accuracy this time," Coach Davis called, his voice carrying across the field with a warmth he never directed toward Jordan. Jordan clenched his jaw, swallowing the bitterness that threatened to rise. He had seen this play out too many times. He knew what came next. Brett stepped up, clumsily snapping the ball. His throw wobbled through the air far too high and sailed over the receiver's head. Jordan caught the sight of Coach Davis grimacing slightly, but there was no reprimand. "All right, not bad, Brett. Keep working on that form," Coach Davis said, in a tone that was more encouraging than critical. Jordan shook his head in disbelief. He had just outperformed Brett in every possible way, yet Davis was the one receiving the reassurance. It wasn't fair. It never had been. As practice wound down, Jordan stayed late to get in some extra reps. His muscles ached, but the desire to push through was stronger. The field was nearly empty, save for a few other players who were lingering around, gathering their equipment. Jordan was running sprints when he heard footsteps approaching from behind. "Hey Jordan, you got a minute?" Jordan turned to see Coach Davis standing a few yards away, arms still crossed. His expression was hard to read, as always. Jordan wiped the sweat from his forehead with his sleeve, nodding. "Yeah, Coach, what's up?" Davis's eyes lingered on him for a moment before he spoke. "I saw what you did out there today." Jordan waited, expecting a compliment, though he wasn't holding his breath. Davis wasn't one for praise when it came to Jordan. "You played well," Coach Davis said, his tone grudging. "But I need to remind you that this is a team game. You can't be out there showing off, making it all about yourself. That's not how we do things around here. Jordan blinked, surprised. Showing off? He had been giving everything he had, trying to earn the spot he deserved. I wasn't trying to show off, Coach. I was just doing my best. Coach Davis's lips pressed into a thin line. Look, Carter, I know you've got talent. Everyone sees that. But talent doesn't always mean leadership. I need someone who can lead this team, who the guys can trust. Brett has those qualities. Jordan couldn't believe what he was hearing. Brett had barely managed to complete a pass during practice, and he was supposed to be the leader. Jordan felt his frustration building, but he forced himself to stay calm. So what are you saying, Coach? That no matter how hard I work, how much better I get, I'll never be more than just talented to you. Coach Davis's eyes hardened. I'm saying, Carter, that you need to learn your place on this team. Sometimes that means taking a back seat. Jordan felt his stomach drop. His place? The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had given everything to this team, to this game, and yet here he was, being told he needed to stay in his lane. Without another word, Coach Davis turned and walked off the field, leaving Jordan standing there, speechless, his hands clenched into fists, the anger burning in his chest. No matter how hard he worked, no matter how many touchdowns he scored, it was never going to be enough for Davis. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the field, Jordan let out a long breath, trying to calm the storm inside him. He had known for a long time that Coach Davis wasn't going to give him the recognition he deserved, but hearing it so plainly, so bluntly, made it all the more real, and it hurt. Jordan finished his sprints. Even though every fiber of his body screamed at him to quit, he couldn't give up, not now. Not after everything. As he walked toward the locker room, he heard someone call his name. Jordan, wait up. He turned to see Maya, his girlfriend, jogging toward him, a smile on her face. Even in the fading light, she looked radiant. Her curly hair framed her face, and her eyes shone with warmth and love. She was a constant source of strength for Jordan, always there when he needed someone to talk to. Hey, she said, reaching him and pulling him into a quick hug. I saw you out there. You were amazing as always. Jordan smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Thanks. Not that it matters much to Davis. Maya frowned, picking up on the tension in his voice. What do you mean? Jordan sighed, shaking his head. He pulled me aside after practice and basically told me that no matter what I do, Brett's going to be the leader of this team. He said I need to learn my place. Can you believe that? Maya's expression darkened, her eyes narrowing in anger. He said that? What the hell, Jordan? That's not right. Everyone knows you're the best player on that field by far. Davis is he's biased. He's been that way forever. You can't let him get to you. Jordan ran a hand through his short-cropped hair, his frustration boiling just beneath the surface. I know, but it's hard, Maya. I've been working my ass off for years, and it's like none of it matters. No matter how good I get, he's never going to see me as anything more than just another player. Maya reached out and placed a hand on his arm, her voice softening. That's because Davis is blind. He doesn't want to see what's right in front of him. But you can't give up. You've got people who believe in you, your teammates, your family, me. Don't let one man's ignorance define your worth. Jordan looked down at her, her words sinking in. He knew she was right. Coach Davis's opinion wasn't the end-all, be-all. There were others who saw his potential, others who believed in him. He just needed to hold on to that. Thanks, Maya, he said quietly. I don't know what I'd do without you. She smiled up at him, squeezing his arm gently. You'd still be amazing, but I'm glad I can be here for you. The two of them walked toward the parking lot, the tension in Jordan's body easing slightly with each step. He wasn't sure what his next move would be, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to let Coach Davis's bias hold him back. He had worked too hard, come too far, to let anyone tell him his place. As they reached Maya's car, she paused, turning to face him. You know, you could go public with this. Jordan frowned. What do you mean? I mean, you're not the first black player Davis has done this to. I've heard stories. You could talk to someone, get the truth out there. People would listen. It's not just about football, Jordan. It's about the way people like Davis get away with this stuff year after year. Jordan considered her words, the idea gnawing at him. Could he really do that? Go public? Expose Coach Davis for the racist that he was? It felt risky, but at the same time he knew it might be the only way to make real change. I don't know, he said slowly. It's a lot to think about. Maya nodded, understanding. I get it. Just don't let him silence you. You've got a voice, and people need to hear it. Jordan watched her climb into her car, his mind spinning with possibilities. As she drove away, he stood alone in the parking lot, the night closing in around him. He wasn't sure what his next step would be, but one thing was certain: he wasn't going to let Coach Davis define his future. Not anymore. The lights of the stadium gleamed brightly as the Friday night crowd gathered in the bleachers, buzzing with anticipation. It was one of the biggest games of the season, and the stands were packed with students, parents, and local fans eager to see their high school team compete. The energy was electric, but for Jordan Carter, the excitement was bittersweet. As he stood on the sidelines, helmet in hand, his heart raced with frustration and resentment. Once again, despite being the most talented player on the team, Jordan was on the bench. The game had started nearly 20 minutes ago, and Coach Davis still hadn't put him in. Instead, Brett Howard was taking every snap, making careless mistakes and barely holding the team together. Jordan watched as Brett missed yet another pass, the ball flying over the head of the wide receiver and bouncing out of bounds. The crowd groaned, and Jordan could hear murmurs of discontent ripple through the stands. People were beginning to notice. But despite Brett's poor performance, Coach Davis kept him in the game, yelling at him to stay focused instead of making the obvious substitution. Jordan's jaw tightened as he adjusted his gloves, fighting the urge to storm onto the field himself. Next to him, Chris, one of the team's linebackers, nudged him with his elbow. You should be out there, man. This is ridiculous. Jordan glanced at him, his frustration mirrored in Chris's face. Yeah, tell me something I don't know. Chris shook his head, his voice low so Coach Davis wouldn't overhear. Everyone knows you're the best player we've got. I don't get what Coach's problem is. Jordan's eyes flicked toward the field, where Brett had just fumbled the snap, scrambling to recover the ball before a defender could dive on it. The play ended in disaster, with the team losing yardage and the crowd growing more restless. Jordan felt a knot of anger tighten in his chest. I know what his problem is, Jordan muttered under his breath. It's not about talent, it never has been. Chris nodded slowly, understanding. He didn't need Jordan to spell it out. The racial bias was obvious to anyone paying attention, though it was rarely discussed openly. Coach Davis had a history of favoring white players, even when it was clear they weren't the best choice for the team. Jordan had seen it happen to other black athletes before him, but now it was personal. As the team huddled on the field, Coach Davis continued to bark orders, his face flushed with frustration. Jordan could see the tension in Brett's shoulders, the pressure mounting as the game slipped further out of their control. But still, Davis refused to make the switch. You've got this, Brett, Coach Davis shouted, his voice laced with a forced encouragement that rang hollow in Jordan's ears. Brett didn't look so confident, though. His face was pale, his movements stiff as he took the next snap. The defense blitzed, and within seconds Brett was sacked hard, the ball knocked from his hands. The crowd erupted in boos, and even from the sidelines, Jordan could feel the wave of disappointment wash over the team. This was his moment. This was the time for Coach Davis to finally put him in and let him turn the game around. Jordan stood up, readying himself, knowing the team needed him now more than ever. But as the whistle blew and the referees reset the ball, Coach Davis walked over to Brett, pulling him aside for a quiet word of encouragement. Jordan watched in disbelief as Davis patted Brett on the shoulder and gestured for him to stay in the game. It was like a bad dream playing out in slow motion. How could he not see it? How could he not see what everyone else did that Jordan was the answer? Anger boiled in Jordan's veins, and he threw his helmet onto the bench in frustration. He couldn't take it anymore. Sitting here, watching his team struggle while he was forced to the sidelines, it was unbearable. Coach put me in, Jordan called out, unable to keep the desperation out of his voice. I can turn this around. Coach Davis turned to him, his expression hard and unyielding. You'll go in when I say you're ready, Carter. Stay focused." "I am focused," Jordan shot back, his frustration spilling over. "I've been ready this whole time." Davis's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the tension between them felt like a palpable force on the field. The coach looked at Jordan with something that wasn't just authority, it was a thinly veiled contempt, a stubborn refusal to give Jordan the chance he deserved. "Don't question me," Coach Davis said coldly. "You'll play when I decide you will." Jordan opened his mouth to argue further, but Chris grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "Don't, man. You're just going to make it worse." Jordan closed his mouth, biting back the words he wanted to scream. He knew Chris was right. Arguing with Coach Davis would only make things harder for him, but that didn't make it any easier to swallow the bitter taste of being sidelined once again. The game continued to spiral out of control. By halftime, the team was down by 2 touchdowns, and the mood in the locker room was tense. Brett sat on the bench, his head hanging in defeat, while the rest of the players whispered among themselves, wondering why Jordan hadn't been given the chance to play. As the team regrouped for the second half, Jordan sat silently on the bench, his anger simmering just below the surface. He was tired of waiting for his moment. He was tired of watching his teammates struggle while he was kept out of the game. It wasn't fair, and everyone knew it. But as the second half began, something unexpected happened. On the first play, Brett dropped back to pass, his eyes scanning the field for an open receiver. But before he could release the ball, a defender crashed into him from the side, driving him hard into the ground. Brett let out a pained cry, clutching his shoulder as he hit the turf. The crowd gasped, and the referees immediately blew the whistle, signaling for the medical staff to come onto the field. Jordan watched in shock as Brett was helped to his feet, his face twisted in pain. The trainers led him to the sidelines, where it was clear he wouldn't be returning to the game. Jordan's heart raced. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. With Brett out, there was no one left for Coach Davis to rely on. He had to put Jordan in now. He had no choice. Coach Davis's face was grim as he looked down the bench, his eyes finally landing on Jordan. For a long moment, the two locked eyes, and Jordan felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This wasn't just about football anymore, it was about proving his worth, not just to the coach, but to everyone who had ever doubted him. Carter Davis called out reluctantly, "You're up." Jordan grabbed his helmet and stood up, his legs feeling both light and heavy at the same time. This was his chance. After everything he had been through, after all the waiting, it was finally his time to shine. As he stepped onto the field, the crowd's energy shifted. There were murmurs of excitement and anticipation. People knew what Jordan could do, and now they were about to see it firsthand. The first play was a simple handoff, but Jordan could feel the momentum beginning to build. He executed the play perfectly, his hands steady and his movements sharp. With each snap, his confidence grew, and soon, the team started to rally behind him. On the next possession, Jordan took the snap and dropped back, scanning the field. The defense was closing in, but he kept his eyes up, waiting for the right moment. Then, he saw his opportunity, a receiver breaking free down the sideline. Without hesitation, Jordan launched the ball, sending it soaring through the air in a perfect spiral. The receiver caught it in stride and sprinted into the end zone for a touchdown. The crowd erupted in cheers, and for the first time all night, the team felt alive. Jordan pumped his fist in the air as his teammates rushed over to celebrate. "Hell yeah," Chris shouted, slapping him on the back. "That's what I'm talking about." Jordan grinned, feeling the adrenaline surging through his veins. He wasn't just playing well, he was dominating. With him at the helm, the team began to claw its way back into the game, closing the gap with each possession. Coach Davis, standing on the sidelines, watched with a mixture of frustration and grudging respect. He couldn't deny that Jordan was turning the game around, but even as the team rallied, Davis remained cold, refusing to give Jordan the credit he deserved. In the final moments of the game, with the score tied and only seconds left on the clock, Jordan found himself in the spotlight once again. It was 4th down, and the team was just outside of field goal range. They needed a miracle to win the game. As Jordan huddled with his teammates, the pressure weighed heavily on his shoulders. This was the moment that would define him, not just as an athlete, but as a leader. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, the weight of their expectations bearing down. "We've got this," Jordan said, his voice steady. "Just follow my lead." The team nodded, trusting him completely. When they broke the huddle, Jordan took his position behind the center, his heart pounding in his chest. The defense was lined up, ready to blitz, but Jordan didn't flinch. He was ready. The ball snapped and everything seemed to slow down. Jordan dropped back, his eyes scanning the field as the defense charged toward him. He saw his opening a receiver breaking free across the middle. Without hesitation, Jordan fired the ball, threading it perfectly between two defenders. The receiver caught it just short of the end zone but fought through the tackles, driving himself over the goal line as the clock hit 0. Touchdown. The stadium erupted into chaos as the team rushed onto the field, celebrating the last-second victory. Jordan was mobbed by his teammates, who lifted him onto their shoulders in triumph. The crowd chanted his name, and for the first time all night Jordan allowed himself to smile. He had done it. He had turned the game around and led his team to victory. As he climbed down from his teammates' shoulders, Jordan looked toward the sidelines, where Coach Davis stood, arms crossed, his face tight with barely concealed frustration. For a moment, Jordan thought the coach might say something, offer some kind of acknowledgement. But instead, Davis turned away, refusing to meet his eyes. The post-game celebration was bittersweet for Jordan. On one hand, he had proven himself on the field, and his teammates treated him like a hero. On the other hand, the sting of Coach Davis's coldness lingered, a reminder that no matter what he did, it would never be enough for some people. As Jordan walked toward the locker room, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out to see a flood of notifications, texts, social media alerts, and missed calls. One message, in particular, caught his attention. It was from Maya. "Maya, have you seen this? Coach Davis is trending. People are calling him out for not putting you in earlier. You need to see this video." Jordan's heart skipped a beat as he clicked on the link she sent. It was a clip from the post-game interview, where Coach Davis was asked about Jordan's performance. Instead of praising him, Davis downplayed his role in the victory, crediting the team's defense for the comeback and barely mentioning Jordan at all. The video had already gone viral, with thousands of comments calling out the blatant racism. People were furious, demanding answers, and Jordan's name was trending across social media. Jordan stared at the screen, a whirlwind of emotions crashing through him. The victory, the frustration, the overwhelming sense that something bigger was happening. This wasn't just about football anymore, it was about so much more. He glanced around the locker room, where his teammates were still celebrating, and then back down at his phone. The weight of what was coming next settled on his shoulders. The world was watching now, and Jordan realized this was just the beginning. The fallout from the game was immediate and intense. Jordan woke the next morning to find his phone buzzing nonstop. Social media had exploded overnight, with comments, reposts, and articles discussing his performance, but more importantly, they were discussing Coach Davis's treatment of him. The viral clip of the post-game interview had sparked outrage, and it seemed like everyone had an opinion. Jordan scrolled through his notifications, the screen flooded with messages of support from friends, teammates, and even strangers. But mixed in with the encouragement were hateful comments, many from anonymous accounts, racist slurs, accusations that he was making a big deal out of nothing, and claims that he was trying to stir up trouble. He tossed the phone aside, not wanting to deal with the negativity. A knock on his bedroom door broke his thoughts. "Jordan, breakfast is ready," his mom called from the other side of the door. Jordan sighed and pulled himself out of bed, running a hand through his hair. The house smelled like bacon and eggs, and despite the heaviness in his chest, his stomach growled. As he entered the kitchen, he found his mom and dad sitting at the table, already halfway through their meal. His dad, Ronald Carter, was reading the local paper, a deep frown etched on his face. "Morning," Jordan muttered, sliding into a chair. "Morning," his mom replied, her eyes filled with concern. "You doing okay, baby?" Jordan shrugged. "Yeah, I guess. Just a lot going on." His dad lowered the newspaper and looked directly at him. "I saw the interview. What that coach said, it wasn't right, son." Jordan nodded, but he didn't respond. He wasn't in the mood to rehash everything. It felt too raw, too personal. He took a bite of his eggs, chewing slowly, trying to avoid his parents' concerned gazes. I think you need to talk to someone about this, his mom said gently. People need to know what's been happening, Jordan. Not just last night, but all the other times Coach Davis has sidelined you. His dad grunted in agreement. It's time, son. You can't just let this slide anymore. Jordan set down his fork, the weight of their words pressing on him. He had been considering it going public with everything, but the idea of stirring up more trouble made him uneasy. Was it worth it? What if speaking out only made things worse? I don't know, Jordan said, shaking his head. I don't want to make it all about me. The team's been through a lot, and I don't want to cause more drama. His dad leaned forward, his face serious. It's not about causing drama. It's about standing up for yourself and for other black athletes who've gone through the same thing. This isn't just about one game, Jordan. It's about something bigger. You've got a chance to make a difference. Jordan listened, his father's words sinking in. He knew his dad was right. This wasn't just about him, it was about the systemic racism that had been festering in their community for years. Coach Davis was just one piece of the puzzle. Jordan's phone buzzed again, and he glanced at the screen. It was a text from Maya. Maya, we need to talk. Something big is happening. Jordan felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. What now? He quickly finished his breakfast, excused himself from the table, and called Maya. Hey, what's going on? He asked when she picked up. Have you seen the news today? Maya's voice was tense, a mixture of excitement and concern. Not yet. Why? There's an article. A journalist named Rebecca's been digging into Coach Davis's history. She's been interviewing former players, and they're saying Davis has been discriminating against black athletes for years. It's all over the news. Jordan's heart skipped a beat. Wait, seriously? Yeah, it's huge. She's talking to everyone, parents, players, coaches. This could blow the whole thing wide open. Jordan leaned against the wall, his mind racing. This was bigger than he had anticipated. It wasn't just about his experience anymore, it was about a pattern of behavior that had gone on for far too long. Do you think I should talk to her? Jordan asked. I do, Maya said without hesitation. You need to tell your side of the story. People need to hear it, Jordan. Jordan nodded, even though she couldn't see him. Okay, I'll reach out to her. As he hung up the phone, a new sense of purpose settled over him. If this was going to be exposed, he had to be part of it. He couldn't sit on the sidelines anymore, not with so much at stake. Later that day, Jordan met up with Maya at a local cafe. She had been following the story closely, and her excitement was palpable. I reached out to Rebecca, Jordan said as they sat down with their coffees. She wants to meet with me this afternoon. Maya smiled, a mixture of pride and relief in her eyes. That's great, Jordan. You're doing the right thing. I hope so, Jordan said, though a flicker of doubt still lingered in his mind. I just don't want to make things worse. You won't, Maya assured him. You're standing up for yourself and for everyone else who's been treated unfairly. It's not just about you anymore. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to the next kid who comes through the program. Jordan nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He knew she was right, but that didn't make it any less daunting. The idea of going public with his story felt overwhelming, but at the same time it felt necessary. As they sat together, sipping their drinks, a group of students from their school walked by. One of them, Marcus, a junior on the football team, waved at Jordan. Hey Carter, you played great last night, man. That touchdown was insane. Jordan smiled and waved back. Thanks, man. As Marcus and his friends continued down the street, Maya raised an eyebrow. See? People are behind you. You're not alone in this. Jordan nodded, but deep down he knew that not everyone felt the same way. For every person who supported him, there were others who saw him as a troublemaker, someone stirring the pot. He had seen the comments online, the ugly, racist remarks that tried to discredit him, but he couldn't let that stop him. He had to keep moving forward. That afternoon, Jordan met with Rebecca Marshall, the journalist who had been investigating Coach Davis. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 30s, with sharp eyes and a determined expression. They sat in her office, surrounded by stacks of notes and folders. Thank you for coming in, Jordan, Rebecca said, offering him a warm smile. I've heard a lot about you. Thanks for reaching out, Jordan replied, still feeling a little nervous. I wasn't sure if I should do this, but I think it's time. Rebecca nodded, her expression serious. I'm glad you're here. I've been speaking with several former players who've told me similar stories about Coach Davis. This isn't just about one game, it's about a long history of racial discrimination. Jordan swallowed hard. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a shiver down his spine. I want to tell your story, too, Rebecca continued. You've been a standout athlete, and from what I've gathered, Coach Davis has consistently downplayed your achievements and kept you on the sidelines, am I right? Jordan nodded, the memories of all the times he had been overlooked flashing through his mind. Yeah, that's pretty much it. No matter how well I play, it's like it doesn't matter. He always finds a reason to keep me out. Rebecca leaned forward, her eyes focused on him. Do you think it's because of your race? Jordan hesitated for a moment, then nodded again. I do. It's not just me either. I've seen it happen to other black players too. They don't get the same opportunities as the white players, even when they're better. Rebecca scribbled notes as he spoke, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of empathy and determination. Thank you for sharing that, Jordan. Your voice is important, and I think people need to hear this. We're going to run a story on this, and it's going to be big. But I want you to be prepared there will be backlash. People are going to try to discredit you, to downplay what you've experienced. Jordan nodded, already aware of what was coming. He had seen the hate online, and he knew it would only get worse once the story broke. But he was ready. I'm prepared for that, he said. I just want the truth to come out. Rebecca smiled. That's all we can do. As the days passed, the tension in the community grew. The article was published online, and it quickly went viral, spreading across social media like wildfire. Rebecca had interviewed several former players, and their stories echoed Jordan's experiences, years of being overlooked, mistreated, and sidelined by Coach Davis simply because they were black. The story caused an uproar. Some people rallied behind Jordan and the other players, calling for Coach Davis to be fired and for the school to investigate the systemic racism in its sports program. Others, however, defended Davis, claiming that the accusations were baseless and that Jordan was just trying to cause trouble. The school board announced an official investigation into Coach Davis's conduct, and in the meantime, Davis was placed on administrative leave. It was a small victory, but the battle was far from over. Jordan found himself at the center of a storm. He received calls from news outlets, requests for interviews, and messages of support from people he had never met. But he also faced an onslaught of hate, particularly online, where trolls bombarded him with racist comments and threats. One day, as Jordan was leaving school, he was confronted by Brett, the quarterback who had been at the center of the controversy. Brett's face was tight with anger, his fists clenched at his sides. You happy now, Carter? Brett spat. You got what you wanted. You ruined Coach Davis's career. Jordan stopped in his tracks, his own anger flaring. I didn't ruin anything. Coach Davis did this to himself. Brett scoffed, stepping closer. He was a great coach, and you just had to go and make it all about race. You're the one who's tearing this team apart. Jordan clenched his jaw, his fists curling at his sides. He could feel the anger boiling inside him, but he forced himself to stay calm. This was never just about the team, Brett. This is about more than football. Brett glared at him, his eyes burning with resentment. Yeah, well, thanks to you, none of us are going anywhere. Colleges aren't going to want to recruit us with all this drama going on. Jordan's heart sank at the accusation, but he refused to back down. If colleges don't want to recruit us because of this, then maybe they're part of the problem too. Brett shook his head in disgust and turned to walk away. Whatever, man. I hope it was worth it. As Brett stormed off, Jordan felt a mix of emotions swirling inside him: anger, sadness, frustration. He knew this fight wasn't going to be easy, and he knew he was going to lose some people along the way. But he also knew that standing up for what was right was more important than keeping everyone happy. Maya met him in the parking lot a few minutes later, her face filled with concern. What happened? Brett, Jordan said, shaking his head. He's pissed, says I ruined everything. Maya sighed, slipping her hand into his. You didn't ruin anything, Jordan. You're standing up for what's right. That's more important than what people like Brett think. Jordan squeezed her hand, grateful for her support. I know. I just wish it didn't have to be like this. I know, Maya said softly. But change never comes easy. You're doing the right thing. As they walked toward the car, Jordan felt the weight of everything pressing down on him, the controversy, the backlash, the uncertainty about the future. But despite it all, he knew he couldn't stop now. This was just the beginning. The atmosphere at the school had shifted dramatically since Coach Davis had been placed on administrative leave. Whispers followed Jordan down the hallways, and while some students greeted him with support, others glared or ignored him completely. His once tight-knit football team was now fractured, with some players standing by him and others accusing him of tearing the team apart. It weighed heavily on him, but Jordan tried not to let it show. He had expected backlash, but the reality of it was harder to face than he anticipated. Every day felt like a battle, one that had moved beyond the football field and into every aspect of his life. His meetings with Rebecca had gone well, and her story continued to gain traction. Local news stations picked it up, and soon national outlets were reaching out for interviews. The conversation had grown larger than just one high school coach. Now people were talking about systemic racism in high school sports, the underrepresentation of black athletes in leadership roles, and how deeply entrenched bias was in athletic programs across the country. But with the attention came more backlash. Coach Davis had supporters, people who believed he was being unfairly targeted, that he was a victim of cancel culture. Social media buzzed with heated debates, and Jordan's name became a lightning rod for controversy. Maya was his anchor during all of it. She stood by his side, offering support and keeping him grounded. But even she couldn't protect him from everything. One day after practice, Jordan found his locker vandalized with racial slurs spray painted across the door. His heart sank as he stared at the ugly words, bile rising in his throat. Maya was with him when he discovered it, and her reaction was immediate. This is sick, she spat, her eyes blazing with anger. How can people be so disgusting? Jordan clenched his fists, trying to keep his emotions in check. I guess this is what happens when you speak up. You can't let them get to you, Maya said, placing a comforting hand on his arm. They're trying to scare you, but you're stronger than this. Jordan nodded, but the weight of the situation was pressing down on him. He was strong, but even the strongest people had limits. Later that evening after practice, Jordan sat on his bed, staring at the wall, lost in thought. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, and he picked it up to find a message from Coach Johnson, the assistant coach who had been placed in charge after Coach Davis's suspension. Coach Johnson, need to talk. Can we meet tomorrow? Jordan frowned, unsure of what the meeting was about. Coach Johnson had always been supportive of him, but ever since Davis had been suspended, the team had been in disarray. Jordan wasn't sure what to expect. He replied with a simple sure and set his phone aside, wondering what tomorrow would bring. The next day, Jordan met Coach Johnson in his office after school. The older man sat behind his desk, his expression serious but kind. He motioned for Jordan to sit down, and Jordan took a seat, feeling a bit anxious. Thanks for coming in, Coach Johnson said, folding his hands on the desk. I wanted to talk to you about the upcoming championship game. Jordan's stomach tightened at the mention of the championship. Despite everything that had been going on, the football season hadn't stopped. The team had managed to scrape by in the last few games, but without a clear leader on the field, they had struggled. Now, the biggest game of the season was approaching, and the team's future hung in the balance. I know things have been tough lately, Coach Johnson continued, his voice calm but firm, but I need you to know something. The team needs you, Jordan, more than ever. Jordan blinked, surprised by the statement. What do you mean? Coach Johnson leaned forward, his eyes locking with Jordan's. I mean, you're the best player we've got, and you've shown more leadership than anyone else on that field. I'm making you the starting quarterback for the championship. Jordan stared at him, stunned. He had dreamed of this moment for years, of being named the starting quarterback in the most important game of the season. But after everything that had happened, he hadn't expected it to come now. I know this isn't going to be easy, Coach Johnson continued. There's a lot of pressure on you right now, but I believe in you. and the team needs someone to step up and lead them. Jordan felt a rush of emotions, pride, excitement, and fear all swirling together. "Are you sure the team will follow me?" he asked, his voice low. "I mean, not everyone's on my side right now." Coach Johnson nodded. "I know, but that's part of being a leader. You've got to bring them together. I can help guide them, but they need to see that you're ready to lead. You've earned this, Jordan. Now it's time to show everyone what you can do." Jordan took a deep breath, the weight of the responsibility settling on his shoulders. This was what he had been fighting for, the chance to prove himself, to lead his team to victory. But the stakes were higher than ever before. It wasn't just about football anymore. This was about standing up for everything he believed in. "I'll do it," Jordan said, his voice steady. "I won't let you down, Coach." Coach Johnson smiled, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "I know you won't. Now, let's get to work." In the days leading up to the championship game, the tension in the air was palpable. The team practiced harder than ever, and under Coach Johnson's leadership, they began to regain their focus. But not everything was smooth. There were still murmurs of discontent among some of the players, particularly from Brett, who had lost his starting position after his injury. One afternoon, after a grueling practice, Brett approached Jordan in the locker room. His face was set in a hard expression, and there was no mistaking the anger in his eyes. "So, you're the big man now, huh?" Brett said, his voice dripping with bitterness. Jordan didn't flinch. "It's not like that, Brett. Coach made the call. I'm just trying to do what's best for the team." Brett scoffed, crossing his arms. "You mean what's best for you?" Jordan shook his head, refusing to get pulled into a fight. "I'm not trying to take anything from you. We're all on the same team." Brett glared at him, his fists clenched at his sides. "You think you're better than me? Just because you got some attention in the media, you think you can lead this team?" Jordan stared at Brett, feeling a surge of frustration. "This isn't about the media. It's about what's happening on the field. We've got a chance to win this championship, Brett. Are you going to help us, or are you going to get in the way?" Brett's jaw tightened, but after a long moment, he turned and walked away without another word. Jordan watched him go, feeling the tension still hanging in the air. But there was no time to dwell on it. The championship game was only days away, and Jordan had to keep his focus on what mattered. When the night of the championship game arrived, the stadium was packed with fans. The energy in the air was electric, and Jordan could feel the pressure mounting as he stood on the sidelines, waiting for the game to begin. The weight of everything, Coach Davis's suspension, the media attention, the tension within the team pressed down on him like a heavy burden. But as the whistle blew and the game kicked off, all of that faded into the background. For the first time in weeks, Jordan felt a sense of clarity. This was where he belonged on the field, leading his team. The first quarter was rough. The opposing team, a powerhouse known for their aggressive defense, came out strong, pushing Jordan and his teammates to their limits. But Jordan kept his cool, methodically leading the offense down the field. His passes were sharp, his decisions quick, and slowly but surely they began to find their rhythm. By halftime, the game was tied. The locker room was tense, the players silent as Coach Johnson gave his speech. But as Jordan sat there listening, he realized something had changed. His teammates were looking to him now not with resentment, but with respect. They were relying on him to lead them to victory. When they took the field for the second half, Jordan knew it was time to step up. He gathered the offense in the huddle, his voice steady as he gave the play call. "We've got this," he said, looking each of his teammates in the eye. "They're strong, but we're stronger. Let's show them what we're made of." The team responded with a renewed sense of determination. And as the third quarter wore on, Jordan began to take control of the game. He connected with his receivers on deep passes, orchestrated perfect runs, and even scrambled for a few key first downs. The crowd roared with each play, the noise deafening as the team fought their way toward the end zone. With only a few minutes left in the game, the score was still tied. The tension was unbearable, the pressure mounting with each passing second. Jordan stood behind the center, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the moment everything had been leading up to. The ball snapped and Jordan dropped back, scanning the field. The defense was closing in fast, but he kept his eyes up, looking for an opening. And then, in the corner of the end zone, he saw his receiver breaking free from the defender, wide open. Without hesitation, Jordan launched the ball, a perfect spiral cutting through the air. The receiver leaped, his hands outstretched, and caught the ball in the end zone. Touchdown. The stadium erupted in cheers as Jordan's teammates rushed to celebrate with him. The scoreboard flashed the final score, and the realization hit him all at once: they had won. They were champions. As his teammates hoisted him onto their shoulders, the weight of everything he had been through, the frustration, the pain, the anger melted away. This was the moment he had dreamed of, the moment he had fought so hard to reach. But as he looked around at the cheering crowd, the flashing lights of the cameras, and the faces of his teammates, Jordan knew this victory was about more than just a game. It was about proving that he belonged, about standing up for what was right. And in that moment, he knew that no matter what came next, he would keep fighting for what he believed in. As the celebration continued, Jordan caught sight of Coach Davis in the crowd, standing off to the side, watching with a tight expression. The disgraced coach hadn't been officially fired yet, but his reputation was ruined, and everyone knew he wouldn't be returning. For a moment, their eyes met across the field, and Jordan felt a strange mix of emotions: vindication, yes, but also a deep sadness. Davis had tried to hold him back, but in the end it was Davis who had fallen. Jordan turned back to his teammates, the roar of the crowd filling his ears. This was his moment, and no one, not Coach Davis, not the doubters, not the haters, could take it away from him. The deafening cheers from the championship game were still echoing in Jordan's ears as he lay in bed the next morning, staring at the ceiling. The thrill of victory lingered, but so did the weight of everything that had come before it. Jordan had won the game, but the real battle, the fight for respect, equality, and justice, was far from over. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, drawing his attention. It was filled with notifications, congratulatory texts, social media tags, and interview requests from news outlets still covering the fallout from the game and Coach Davis's suspension. Jordan had expected the attention, but it was overwhelming. Everyone wanted a piece of him now that he had led the team to victory, but not all of the attention was positive. He glanced at one of the messages, from a number he didn't recognize, and opened it. "You think winning a football game makes you a hero? You ruined a good man's life, and people like you are the reason this country is falling apart." Jordan sighed, tossing the phone aside. The hate was still there, simmering just beneath the surface, even in the midst of his triumph. He had expected as much, but that didn't make it any easier to deal with. A knock on his door pulled him from his thoughts. "Jordan? You up?" It was his dad, Ronald Carter, standing in the doorway with a newspaper in hand. "Yeah, I'm up," Jordan replied, sitting up in bed. His dad walked over, holding out the paper with a small smile. "You made the front page, son." Jordan took the newspaper and glanced at the headline: Jordan Carter leads team to victory amid controversy. There was a photo of him from the game, arms raised in triumph after the winning touchdown. "You played a hell of a game last night," Ronald said, his voice filled with pride. "You proved a lot of people wrong." Jordan smiled faintly, though the weight of everything still pressed down on him. "Thanks, Dad. It feels good, but I don't know. It's hard to enjoy it with everything else going on." Ronald sat down on the edge of the bed, his expression serious. "I get it. This isn't just about football anymore. You're in the middle of something much bigger than that." Jordan nodded, the truth of his dad's words sinking in. The game had been a victory, but the fight against the systemic racism that had plagued his school's football program and countless others across the country was ongoing. Coach Davis might have been sidelined, but the issues he represented weren't going away. "You're doing the right thing," Jordan, Ronald continued. "Standing up for yourself, for other black athletes who've been treated unfairly, it's important. But I know it's not easy." Jordan looked down at the newspaper in his hands, the weight of the moment pressing on him. "It's just hard to know if I'm making a difference. People are still saying I'm the reason the team's falling apart. I'm still getting hate from all directions." Ronald reached out and placed a hand on Jordan's shoulder. "You can't focus on the hate. There are always going to be people who don't want change, who don't want to face the truth. But there are also people who are standing with you. people who see what's happening and want to help make things better. Jordan nodded slowly. He knew his dad was right, but it didn't make the burden any lighter. The championship victory had given him a platform, but with that platform came scrutiny, and not everyone wanted to hear what he had to say. Later that morning, Jordan met up with Maya at a local park. She had been his rock throughout the entire ordeal, and now, as they walked together along the tree-lined path, her presence was a welcome comfort. "I'm proud of you, Maya said, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "What you did last night was incredible." Jordan smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thanks. It feels good, but I don't know if it'll change anything." "It already has," Maya replied firmly. "You've started a conversation that needed to happen. People are talking about what's going on about Coach Davis, about the racism in high school sports. That's a big deal, Jordan." Jordan nodded, but the doubt still gnawed at him. "I guess. But sometimes it feels like no matter what I do, people will still find a way to hate me for it." Maya stopped walking and turned to face him, her eyes filled with determination. "You can't let that stop you. The people who hate you for standing up for yourself, those aren't the people you need to worry about. You need to focus on the people you're inspiring, the people who are watching you and realizing they can stand up too." Jordan looked at her, the truth of her words sinking in. He had seen the support, 2 messages from other black athletes, from students who had faced similar struggles. His fight wasn't just his own anymore. It was part of something bigger. "You're right," he said quietly. "I just need to remember that." Maya smiled and leaned in to kiss his cheek. "I'll remind you as many times as you need." In the weeks following the championship game, the investigation into Coach Davis's conduct continued to unfold. More former players came forward with stories of being sidelined, overlooked, and discriminated against, adding fuel to the fire. The school board held a series of meetings, and the community remained deeply divided. During one of the meetings, Jordan was invited to speak. It was an opportunity to share his experience in front of the board, the media, and the people who had supported or vilified him. As he stood at the podium, his heart raced, but he kept his composure, knowing how important this moment was. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady. "My name is Jordan Carter, and I've been a student athlete at this school for the past 4 years. I'm here tonight because I believe it's time to address the systemic issues that have been affecting black athletes like myself for far too long." He paused, glancing around the room. The board members sat with their eyes on him, some nodding in agreement, others watching with guarded expressions. In the audience, he saw Maya, his parents, and several of his teammates, some of whom had been skeptical of him before, but were now showing their support. "For years, I've watched as talented black athletes were sidelined, ignored, and held to a different standard than their white counterparts," Jordan continued. "Coach Davis may be the focus of this investigation, but he's not the only problem. This is about more than just one man. It's about a culture that's been allowed to exist for too long, a culture that tells young black athletes that no matter how hard we work, no matter how talented we are, we will always be seen as less than." Jordan's voice grew stronger as he spoke, the words coming more easily now. "I'm not here to tear anyone down. I'm here because I believe in change. I believe in a future where athletes are judged by their talent, their work ethic, and their character, not by the color of their skin." The room was silent as Jordan finished his speech, the weight of his words hanging in the air. He stepped back from the podium, his heart still pounding, but a sense of relief washing over him. He had said what needed to be said, and now it was up to the board and the community to decide what came next. After the meeting, Jordan was approached by Rebecca, the journalist who had broken the story about Coach Davis. She smiled as she extended her hand to him. "You did great up there, Jordan," she said. "That was a powerful speech." "Thanks," Jordan replied, shaking her hand. "I just hope it makes a difference." "It already has," Rebecca assured him. "The story's not over yet, but you've already started the change. More people are talking about this issue now than ever before. That's because of you." Jordan nodded, feeling a flicker of pride. He had always known this fight would be difficult, but hearing that his efforts were making an impact made it all worth it. As they talked, Jordan noticed a few reporters from national news outlets nearby, watching him with interest. He had been getting more media attention since the championship game, and while it was flattering, it also made him uneasy. The spotlight was bright, and he wasn't sure he wanted to stay in it for much longer. "Is it always going to be like this?" Jordan asked, glancing at the reporters. Rebecca followed his gaze and nodded. "For a little while, yeah, but eventually the attention will die down. The important thing is that the change continues, even after the cameras leave." Jordan smiled faintly. "Yeah, I guess you're right." In the days that followed, the school board made its decision. Coach Davis would not be returning. He was officially dismissed from his position, and the school announced plans to implement new diversity and inclusion training for all coaches and staff. It was a small victory, but it felt like a step in the right direction. Jordan was relieved, but he also knew that this was just the beginning. There was still so much work to be done both in his school and beyond. But for now, he allowed himself to take a breath, to feel the weight of the past few months begin to lift. As the school year wound down, Jordan received several offers from top colleges, schools that had been following his journey both on and off the field. After much deliberation, he chose a university known not only for its football program but for its commitment to social justice and diversity. It felt like the right place for him to continue his journey, both as an athlete and as an advocate for change. On the night before he was set to leave for college, Jordan and Maya sat together on the football field, the same field where so much had happened over the past 4 years. The stadium lights were off, and the only sounds were the distant chirping of crickets and the soft rustling of the wind through the trees. "It's hard to believe it's over," Jordan said, gazing out at the empty field. Maya smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "It's not over. It's just the beginning of a new chapter." Jordan nodded, knowing she was right. He had won a championship, he had stood up for what was right, and now he was about to embark on a new journey. But the fight for justice, for equality, for a better future that would never be over. And Jordan was ready for whatever came next. The early morning sun was just beginning to rise as Jordan Carter stood outside his family's home, his bags packed and loaded into the trunk of his car. Today marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life. He was heading off to college, leaving behind the familiar streets of his hometown and the football field where he had fought so many battles, both on and off the field. Jordan took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill his lungs. It was a strange feeling, standing on the edge of something new. Excitement and nervousness swirled inside him, but there was also a quiet sense of peace. After everything he had been through, he knew he was ready for this next step. As he stood there, looking out at the quiet neighborhood, his dad, Ronald, came up beside him, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "You all set?" he asked, his voice filled with a mixture of pride and emotion. "Yeah, I think so," Jordan replied, glancing back at the car. Ronald nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. "You know, I always knew you were going to do great things, Jordan, even when you were just a kid running around with a football in the backyard. But what you've done this past year, it's bigger than anything I ever imagined." Jordan smiled, but his father's words hit him in a way that felt deeper than usual. He had spent the past few months reflecting on everything that had happened: the championship win, the fight against Coach Davis, the attention from the media. But hearing his dad speak those words, acknowledging the impact he had made, it felt like validation on a whole new level. "I couldn't have done it without you," Dad Jordan said, his voice quiet but steady. "You taught me to fight for what's right, no matter how hard it gets." Ronald smiled, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. "And you did. I'm proud of you, son. You're going to change the world. You already have." Jordan felt a lump form in his throat, but he swallowed it down. He wasn't used to his dad getting emotional, but he knew this was a moment that deserved it. This was the culmination of everything they had worked for, everything they had fought for together as a family. His mom stepped out of the house, wiping her hands on her apron, a wide smile on her face. "Are you boys getting all sentimental without me?" she teased, though her eyes sparkled with pride. Jordan chuckled and walked over to hug her tightly. "I'll miss you, Mom." "You better come home and visit," she said, hugging him back fiercely. "I don't care how busy you get with school and football, you'll always have a place here." "I know," Jordan replied, feeling the warmth of his family's love surrounding him. As they shared their goodbyes, the car pulled up at the curb, a familiar face behind the wheel. Maya stepped out, smiling as she waved to Jordan's parents. She had insisted on driving him to the airport, despite Jordan's protest that he could handle it himself. But deep down, he was grateful she was there. Maya had been by his side through everything, and he couldn't imagine starting this new journey without her. Ready to hit the road, Maya asked, her eyes bright with excitement. Jordan grinned. As ready as I'll ever be. They loaded the last of his bags into the car, and after one final round of hugs and goodbyes, Jordan climbed into the passenger seat. As they drove away from the house, the weight of everything he was leaving behind pressed on him. But at the same time, there was a lightness in his chest, a sense of freedom and possibility that came with moving forward. The drive to the airport was quiet at first, both of them lost in their own thoughts. But after a while, Maya glanced over at him, her brow furrowing slightly. "Are you nervous?" she asked. Jordan thought about it for a moment before nodding. "Yeah, I mean, it's a lot. New school, new team, new city. It's a big change." Maya nodded, her eyes softening. "It is. But you've already handled bigger changes than this, Jordan. You're going to be amazing." Jordan smiled, though there was still a hint of uncertainty in his expression. "I hope so." "You will be," Maya said firmly. "You're not just going there as a football player. You're going there as someone who's already made a difference. People are going to look up to you, not just for your talent, but for what you stand for." Jordan glanced out the window, watching the trees blur by as they drove. He knew Maya was right, but the pressure of being that kind of role model weighed on him. He had always wanted to succeed on the field, but now there was more to it than that. He wasn't just playing football anymore, he was representing something larger. When they arrived at the airport, the reality of his departure started to sink in. They parked the car and made their way to the terminal, where Jordan's flight was set to leave in just a couple of hours. The airport buzzed with activity, people rushing to and from gates, their lives moving forward in different directions. As they waited at the gate, Maya turned to Jordan, her expression serious. "I've been thinking a lot about what's next," she said, her voice steady. "For you, for me, for us." Jordan raised an eyebrow, curious. "Yeah? What are you thinking?" Maya smiled softly. "I'm thinking that I'm not going to let distance get in the way. I know you're going to be busy with school and football, and I've got my own things going on, but I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together no matter how far apart we are." Jordan felt a surge of warmth in his chest. Maya had been his rock through everything, and knowing that she was committed to making things work, even with the challenges of long distance, meant the world to him. "I'm glad to hear that," he said, taking her hand in his. "Because I don't know what I'd do without you." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, watching as the gate began to fill with passengers waiting to board. The reality of the future ahead, both exciting and uncertain, settled over them. Eventually, the boarding announcement came over the loudspeaker, and Jordan knew it was time to go. He stood up, grabbing his bag, and turned to Maya one last time. "This isn't goodbye," she said, her voice soft but strong. Jordan smiled, pulling her into a tight embrace. "I know. I'll see you soon." With one final kiss, Jordan walked toward the gate, the path ahead of him clear but full of unknowns. College life hit Jordan faster than he had expected. The pace was relentless between classes, practices, and getting to know his new teammates. There was little time to catch his breath. But Jordan thrived in the challenge just as he always had. He had been preparing for this moment his entire life, and now that it was here, he embraced every aspect of it. The university he had chosen was known for its strong athletic programs and its commitment to social justice. It was the perfect environment for Jordan, not only because of the football opportunities, but because of the culture. Here he found a community of students and athletes who shared his values, who were passionate about fighting for change both on and off the field. His teammates were welcoming, though it took time to fully earn their trust. Jordan's reputation had preceded him, and while some players respected what he had done back in high school, others were more skeptical. They had seen the headlines, read the articles, and watched the interviews, but they didn't know him yet. They didn't know the full story. One afternoon, after a particularly tough practice, Jordan found himself sitting on the bleachers, exhausted but satisfied with his progress. One of his teammates, Devin, sat down next to him, wiping sweat from his brow. "You're holding your own out there," Devin said with a grin. "Not bad for a freshman." Jordan chuckled, catching his breath. Thanks. It's been tough, but I'm getting the hang of it. Devin glanced at him, his expression more serious now. I've heard about what happened at your old school. That stuff with your coach, it was all over the news. Jordan tensed slightly, unsure of where this conversation was headed. Yeah, it was a lot. Devin nodded, his brow furrowed. I can't imagine what that must have been like. Standing up like that, knowing people were going to come after you. That takes guts, man. Jordan shrugged, trying to downplay it. I just did what I had to do. Yeah, but not everyone would have done it, Devin said, his tone sincere. A lot of people would have kept their heads down, gone with the flow. But you didn't. That's something I can respect. Jordan looked at him, surprised by the admission. He had expected more skepticism, more doubt, but Devin's words felt genuine. Thanks, Jordan said, a small smile forming on his lips. I appreciate that. Devin stood up, stretching his arms above his head. We've got a long season ahead of us, Carter, but I think you're going to fit in just fine. Jordan watched as Devin walked away, feeling a sense of relief. Slowly but surely he was finding his place here. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would be new challenges, new battles to fight, but he was ready for them. As the weeks passed, Jordan began to settle into a routine. Classes, practices, workouts, it all became part of the rhythm of his new life. But he never forgot the lessons he had learned back home, the fight he had led, and the change he had started. One day, while walking across campus, Jordan received a message from Rebecca, the journalist who had written the initial story about Coach Davis. She had stayed in touch with him after the investigation, and they had developed a mutual respect for each other's work. Rebecca, hey Jordan. Just wanted to let you know that the school board back home is implementing new policies for athletic programs, mandatory diversity training for coaches, and more oversight. It's a small step, but it's progress. Thought you'd want to hear the news. Jordan stopped in his tracks, a smile spreading across his face. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was something. It was proof that change was happening, even if it was slow. The fight wasn't over, but they were making strides in the right direction. He replied with a quick thank you, then slipped his phone back into his pocket, feeling a sense of satisfaction. This was what it had all been for not just the victory on the field, but the impact off of it. The change he had fought for was becoming real, and he knew it would continue long after he was gone. As he continued his walk across campus, Jordan looked out at the bustling students around him, each of them heading toward their own futures. His own future was bright, full of possibility, full of promise. He wasn't just an athlete. He was a leader, a fighter, a voice for change. And this was just the beginning.